YouTube is run by white supremacists. That's hardly news. But last Thursday, I delivered a video essay, my Thursday evening address, that was so shocking, so mind-blowing, so beyond belief, that the white supremacists who run YouTube immediately leapt upon it within a couple of hours of the video having been posted. As I keep telling you, these guys are monitoring this channel. It's not a matter of someone tells them, they're watching this place, because the truth spoken here scares them. And what was the subject of the video, might you ask? I was talking about sculptures of George Washington. We were simply talking about art. But the mere discussion of art was too much for the white supremacists who run YouTube. Well, we're going to go ahead and give them another dose of truth. The idea of American exceptionalism is rooted in propaganda. The white media controls the minds of the masses, as I keep telling you, through the use of lying narratives and fraudulent images. And this is not new. It goes all the way back to the founding of the country. And you can use George Washington as an exceptional example of this idea. He is an exceptional case study of how white supremacy uses images in order to forward lies. For example, take a look at this sculpture of George Washington. It was commissioned in 1818 by the North Carolina legislature. But more importantly than that, George Washington's fellow slave-holding thug buddy, Thomas Jefferson, was the person most responsible not only for selecting the sculptor who created this obscenity, but it was also Jefferson's idea to have Washington presented in the attire of a Roman military officer. And if you're wondering what this idiot is supposed to be doing, he's supposed to be writing his farewell address. As the New York Times explained, there was a very serious reason for presenting George Washington as a Roman. Quote, "The artist attempted to elevate Washington out of his historical circumstances and into a pantheon of classical heroes, and to inspire moral elevation more than individual remembrance." Well, that's 3 or 4 lies for the price of one. This was the New York Times, of course, trying to figure out how to say that you ought to love this statue and to love George Washington by extension. There are tons of sculptures of great Americans, tons of sculptures of great people that the New York Times could heap laudatory praise on, but they decided, nah, for George Washington, we're going all out. We're going to tell you that this was a great man. So you see, the same sick mentality that made it so popular to try to mythologize and lionize and deify a slave-holding thug is still alive and well. That mentality is still extant. The racists who produced and promoted this persona of Washington as a Roman, they did this deliberately. They wanted to create the national idea that George Washington was the last Roman. That does make a sick kind of sense when you think about it. The Roman Empire established itself through genocide and wars, as did Washington's America. The New York Times, in a bit of perverted white-splaining, went on to dismiss Washington's slaveholding as being separate from whether or not he deserves praise or whether or not he ought to be shown in any sort of laudatory light. As the New York Times wrote, "What anyway are American values? Washington, Jefferson, and the bulk of their fellow revolutionaries were slaveholders after all, but what the classicized statue implies is that certain ideals, notably liberty and justice for all, endure beyond any individual presidential biography, and those ideals are not invalidated when our leaders flout them." Before I go any farther, let me point out that there is nowhere where you can actually say that this statue is implying certain ideals. This is not merely reading between the lines. This is inventing lines out of whole cloth. And secondly, if you hold somebody up, you hold up the image of a man, even posthumously, if you hold up his image as being the embodiment of certain values, then at the very least, shouldn't he live up to some of them? This is the New York Times doing this crap, saying, never mind the fact that George Washington didn't live up to a damn one of these values, he ought to be held up. We ought to revere him anyway, in spite of the fact that he didn't live up to any of these so-called American values that are being ascribed to him. This is how these guys can, without batting an eyelash, tell you as a black person you ought to stand up for the Star-Spangled Banner, even though it's a slave owner's carol. It's a song that talks about how no slave can ever hope to be free. They're talking about black folks. The Star-Spangled Banner was written by a slave owner. Francis Scott Key owned slaves. He went to court and defended the rights of slave owners. So you got the New York Times showing you that they are in full agreement with this sick mentality. And as for saying that George Washington flouted these American values, let me tell you something. Enslaving people, enslaving children, slaughtering people just to have the ability to own other human beings or to kill other human beings at will, this is not merely flouting liberty and justice and all the rest of that. This is someone who is the enemy of liberty and justice. If you're going to talk about great statues of people who ought to be held up as the embodiment of certain values, then it ought to be someone better than this. This piece that I'm quoting from, this piece of crap is what I should say. It was posted by the New York Times on June 27th of this year. We ain't talking about something from 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. We're talking about something from just a couple of weeks ago. This is the New York Times doing this garbage, folks. How refreshing to have white people dictate to us what is important to remember about a slave owner. This is not merely minimizing what this monster did. This is to demand that we stand up and cheer him, praise him for being a slave owner. The New York Times, all the lies that are fit to print. But this mentality has been going on a long time. No wonder these clowns think they can get away with it. You see all of these images and busts of George Washington created from the late 18th century all the way up until the 20th. You see one statue after the other showing George Washington dressed up as a Roman, trying to connect him to classical, whatever that means, European history. Trying to show that, well, George Washington, he's cut from the same cloth as all of these other great Europeans who went on these rampages of bloody murder across a continent. Hold George Washington up in the same way that you would speak about Napoleon, one of his contemporaries, or the same way that you would speak about King James, or the same way that you would speak about King Arthur and other fables and frauds. These were the buttons that they were trying to push in the popular consciousness. Greece had Alexander the Great, Rome had Julius Caesar, and the United States has George Washington. That's what they were meaning to say. This was going to be the creation of America's national myth, national mythology. And what is a mythology without a pantheon of gods? That's what this is meant to do. Don't believe me about the gods part? In 1840, the United States Congress commissioned this statue of George Washington. This time he's presented not merely as a Roman, but as a god. The very gesture that he's shown in is in fact taken from the classical depictions of Zeus. So the intent of this one was the federal government of the United States making sure to literally etch in stone that George Washington wasn't a man, he is our God. He is the embodiment of American values, but American values are white power. And this is from the United States federal government. We're not talking about a couple of ham-headed racists out in North Carolina or Virginia. This is the federal government doing this before the American Civil War. So what does that tell you? You had all sorts of Yankees and good old boys. They couldn't agree on much, but they could agree that there was a value, that there was worth to putting George Washington on the pedestal of being a deity, to deify this guy. You had Yankees and Southerners who agreed on that. They couldn't agree on much, but they agreed on that. The necessity of holding up this white man, who was a slave owner, as being the embodiment of all that is American and virtuous. And by the way, it didn't stop there. Congress deciding to try to preserve and promote this idea of George Washington as a god on the taxpayer's dime, might I add. You've heard the painting of the Sistine Chapel, right? Well, the racists who run the United States did the exact same thing with George Washington. In 1865, the U.S. Congress commissioned a Greek-Italian artist, Constantino Brumudi, to paint the ceiling of the Capitol building, just like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And part of his fresco was called The Apotheosis of Washington. Now, this image is supposed to be evocative of the Sistine Chapel. In fact, much of it was just ripped off from the Sistine Chapel. I wonder if the Catholic Church could sue. They probably got a case. And it was deliberate, of course, just more of this deifying George Washington. Look how ridiculous this is. Never mind the fact that, like all the other founders of the U.S., George Washington wasn't even a Christian. He was a deist. So it is doubly ridiculous to show George Washington all gussied up and with all of these other Greek and Roman-looking people around him, dressing him up as if somehow he has something to do with Catholicism or the Bible or what have you. But they understand this imagery. They understand exactly what this imagery is supposed to stand for. And this crap was slapped up there in 1865 at a time when the nation was just recovering from a civil war over slavery. The government wanted to make it clear that the U.S. was a white man's land. Blacks were a far larger percentage of the country in 1865 than today, but the white rulers of the U.S. made it a point to exclude any imagery of black people from this painting on the ceiling of what's supposed to be the people's house. But of course, by people's house, they mean white people's house, not black people's. The racists who founded this sick country, who people like the YouTube Clavern happened to adore, they chose someone who they could deify because that was part of the plan. It was all part of the plan that if you are going to show that white supremacy is holy and hallowed and is a value worth laying down your life for, you got to show that the good offices of God himself are lent to the satanic enterprise of white supremacy. That's what this is all about. Nobody questioned the righteousness of the people featured on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, fraud though that is. And if you go ahead and show the leaders of the United States, the founders of the United States, in the exact same format, well, people are going to be less likely to question that too. So here come the lies. Etched in stone, painted on frescoes, engraved in steel, and the country is told that you're supposed to bow down to these images. See, this is not about an American ideal. This is about an American idol. That's what this is. This is idolatry. This is telling people to bow to the image of a pagan deity, St. George of Washington. And by the way, in case you were wondering, according to Merriam-Webster, apotheosis means the perfect form of something, but its secondary definition is elevation to divine status. Yeah, I think that's what they were thinking of when they commissioned this particular fresco. What they were doing was they wanted to elevate George Washington to divine status. This is a guy who didn't even have his own teeth. And yet he's divine. You see how deliberate this is? How brazen they are about it, creating this fraud? Finally, we come to the part that YouTube hated so much. The part of the last video that made it where they had to bring it down. They had to remove it. They felt so threatened by the truth. Well, here it is again. Of all the visual motifs used for George Washington in the early decades of the country's history, the one image that is by far the most prolific is that of George Washington shown standing beside a fasces. And that's not a Roman column, it's a fasces. You see that image of Washington in sculptures of him all over the country, in fact, all over the world. Most of the statues of George Washington that you see are of him standing beside the fasces. Even in England, a statue of Washington in Trafalgar Square shows him beside a fasces. Now, of all the things to show him standing beside, why would they make it a point to have it be the fasces? Why that symbol in particular? The fasces was a Roman artifact, a bundle of wooden rods, most of the time shown with an axe handle protruding from it. The fasces symbolized Roman authority through violence. And I, of course, understand that there's always going to be some person who feels the need to come bombing into the comment section trying to tell us what little they think they know. Last time I had somebody who tried to tell me that the Roman fasces was apparently a symbol of unity. That's what it was supposed to represent. Let me tell you something stupid. I have been telling people till I'm blue in the face, and that would be an accomplishment for me, that there is the standard definition of something, and then there is the practical definition of it. Obviously, some people need to clean the crap out of their ears and listen. The standard definition is what we are told something is, and then the practical definition is how it manifests itself in practice. During Jim Crow, you had the so-called literacy test before you could vote. That's what they were called. They're literacy tests. But actually what they were was, let us come up with a procedure that we can claim on paper disqualifies people, but all the people who are going to be disqualified are black. The only ones who ever get disqualified are black. There's the standard definition of a literacy test, and then there was the practical definition of it, what it was actually for, how it manifested itself. There's the standard definition of what a fascist is, and then there is the practical definition of it. Nobody who was running around with the fascists did it as a symbol of unity. It was always done as a symbol of authority and control. There is nowhere where the fascist has ever stood that could say that it was a symbol of freedom. It has always been a symbol of authoritarian regimes. From Rome to the United States, from Rome to Mussolini's Italy, it has always been a symbol of oppression. It has never been a symbol of gung-ho. It's never been a symbol of let's all stand together. It was just a symbol of the ruthless enemies of freedom and decency should rally together so that they can enact violence against the civilized people of the world. That is what the fascist stands for. That's what it is. No one can lie and say that that thing is a symbol of freedom. And as soon as I saw the fascists, I immediately focused on it. You want to know why? Because the fascists is where we get the word fascism from. But the racist rulers of the U.S. were practicing fascism long before Benito Mussolini did, long before fascism was even a term. Fascism is dead in Italy today, but as we see with President Tangerine, fascism is alive and well in the United States. And why not? The U.S. was the birthplace of fascism, just like it was the birthplace of Nazism. And how fitting that George Washington was the first fascist. He was the father of fascism. When you see a man whose most numerous image is him standing beside a symbol from which we get the word fascism, it doesn't get more blatant than that, folks. And by the way, it's not just George Washington where we see the symbol of the fascists. In the House of Representatives, you find not one but two fascists. Every time a president delivers a State of the Union address, it is actually a state of fascism address. And this in what's supposed to be the people's house just goes to show you that fascism is not merely something practiced by America's founders. Fascism runs at the very core of the United States government. Fascism is the foundation of this wicked, sick nation. The people who rule this demented white supremacist playground, this white supremacist toilet, they're showing you that you don't live in a democracy. You never have. You live in and have always lived under fascism. The United States is not a republic. Never has been. The United States is a theocracy, and the official state religion is white supremacy. And when you see George Washington depicted in messianic imagery, that lets you know that he is the embodiment of America's white supremacist God. That's what's going on here. That's what YouTube feared so much and didn't want you to hear. This is what they don't want you to see. The iconography of white supremacy, of fascism, of evil is all around you. And when you understand that it's this blatant, that's when you realize it's been right in front of you the whole freaking time. They weren't hiding it. They were never hiding it. They just don't talk about it. They do something better than talk. They act it out. Actions have always spoken louder than words. Just like when YouTube took the video down before, they didn't have to say that I terrified them. Their actions spoke far louder than their words ever would. Whenever people talk about removing symbols of racism, you'll remember that President Tangerine appealed to white anxiety and he demanded to know, well, we're going to be taking down the images of racist American presidents. Where does it stop? Where does it stop? This is the reason why he said that. This is the reason why he was in such a panic. The founders of the U.S. were slave owners and genocidal lunatics and fascists. And the men who walk in their footsteps, they stand in the Capitol building, they stand beside the Washington Monument. Did you know that there is an image of George Washington standing beside a fascist inside the base of the Washington Monument? It's all around you. They did that deliberately. They know about it, you don't. You see it right in front of you, you don't acknowledge it, but they do. This is why you don't see me telling you that you're going to get results from voting for politicians at the national level. It's about more than that. These guys stand under not one but two symbols of fascism every time they go to work. I know that some of you out there still cling to the rotted corpse of black congressmen and the occasional black senator, and you think that these people somehow represent you. They do not. They made a deal with the devil when they took office. You keep demanding that they stand up for democratic principles, and they don't even work in a democratic institution. They understand what's really going on here. You're the one who's confused. You're the one who doesn't get it. So I want you to understand, this is basically a Cliff Notes version of the video that I gave before, because I want to hit on the most important points. That the imagery of George Washington and the sick white supremacy that undergirds it, the idea of we're going to choose a man who we know to be nothing more than flesh and blood, and racist, corrupt flesh and blood at that, we're going to deliberately deify him, or as the word apotheosis means, we are going to elevate him to divine status. That is not just happenstance. It was deliberate. Did you think that Thomas Jefferson just pulled that one out of his racist behind? He knew exactly what he was doing. And the men who continued to do that, to press that particular type of image of George Washington long after his death, after all the founders of the United States were dead, and even then when they were dead, they decided, oh, to hell with George Washington as a mere Roman. We're going to show him as a god. When the Congress commissioned that statue of George Washington as Zeus, and that's what it was meant to be, was George Washington as the god as the king of the gods, they did that after Washington was dead. So they became even more outrageous in their hero worship of him. Not less, more outrageous. It just goes to show that when you create a myth, like all myths, it gets bigger and better over time. Every time you tell it, the story gets better. Because that's the idea. They knew that it was going to be exploded beyond all possible reality, and that was the point. Make George Washington bigger than life? Yeah, that's the ticket. Because when they say George Washington, at the end of the day, you get confused. Because on the one hand, you know that he was a slave owner, though the New York Times decides that that's not that important. That's just a trivial, minor detail that only petty people would focus on. Even though that's where George Washington made his money from. George Washington paid the Continental Army, at least for a while, he had to pay them out of his own pocket. Where did George Washington get the money to be able to pay an army from? He got it from slavery. He got it from his plantation. But the New York Times doesn't bring that up. The fact that the country owes its very existence to the fact that George Washington was making his money off of slavery. Well, we don't mention that. Bury the truth. And this is supposed to be what passes for media. And you don't hear this coming from any of the congressional black talkers. They don't bring up the fraud of George Washington the Roman, George Washington the Divine. They're not going to. Because they are making their money off of this white supremacist institution, the the administrative arm of white supremacy, and they're not going to say that the administrative arm of white supremacy has something wrong with it. They know the game and they love to play along. I still gotta laugh at the New York Times and their pathetic little white-splaining saying that the artist attempted to elevate Washington out of his historical circumstances and into a pantheon of classical heroes. No, showing Washington as a Roman military officer, that is not elevating him out of his circumstances. And they say that as if there were high-minded racists in the 18th century deciding, well, or rather 19th century, saying, well, we've got to make George Washington better than what he was because he was such a poor, downtrodden fellow. Hell no, this was not about elevating him out of his circumstances. This was about not merely putting him into a pantheon of classical heroes, as we see with the Congress in 1840. This was about elevating George Washington to the pantheon of gods. That's what it was really about. But you don't hear this on TV none. You don't hear it on buffoon entertainment television. You don't hear it from any of the fakers, frauds, and phonies who call themselves black media, the old dead black media. This is the reason why we got to make sure that we put the old black media in its coffin and nail that damn thing shut. And by the way, speaking of ineffective black mouthpieces, white supremacy uses their black puppets to push their agenda. That's no surprise, but the problem is white supremacy is slowly drawing the curtain on its tools and breaking them one by one. We've seen a certain entire ethnic groups who thought that they were going to be white supremacy's good buddies are now having to come in for some abuse. Oh, and on the black side of the ledger, the black folks who thought that they were going to keep eating off of white supremacy, well, they're finding that the menu is getting smaller and smaller, and the service at Cafe White Supremacy, it's becoming a lot more surly these days. The portions are getting a lot more skimpy. Oh, what is a black bootlick to do when White Daddy cuts them off? These clowns are stupid. That's why they became tools of white supremacy in the first place. So they don't want to accept what's clearly right in front of them. White supremacy is beginning to cut the strings for their puppets. And these morons don't have a plan B. They figured that getting a pat on the head or getting a gig with this or that white apparatus, whether in government or media, was going to be a career, and they're figuring out that white supremacy has no long-term plans for any of its tools. You can get out there and sing the Star-Spangled Banner long as you want. David Clark thought that was going to make him a shoo-in. Get out there and cheer on the police murdering black people. That's what these good white supremacists want to hear. Yeah, except they looked and said, thanks for saying that, stupid. We got a couple of chuckles out of watching a black person cheerleading the death of other black people. But, we're tired of looking at you too, David Clark. That's what he found out. Or maybe not. That boy's always been kind of slow, so I doubt he's actually figured it out. He's probably sitting there right now going, I don't understand why it is that I didn't get put in the cabinet. Not even a government job. Not even a government grant. I wonder what I did wrong. Maybe I didn't bash black people enough. That boy talks like freaking Lurch, don't he? Black so-called police and teachers and other government employees are finding out that their would-be career advancement stopped dead in its tracks. And as for black politicians, well, the less said, the better. Except these clowns have spent not a few years with people calling them congressman or senator or some other sort of highfalutin title, and it went completely to their empty little heads. And these black politicians need to be singled out for special scorn because they depend upon the rank-and-file black citizen to vote for them. These guys are traitors to black empowerment. They're white infiltrators sent to spy on us, to mislead us, to take any revolutionary fervor that we have and to dispel it or to focus it away from white supremacy. That's what they were sent into the black community to do. Their presence is not an accident. As far as they're concerned, they're going to make a career out of being a politician. That's the reason why these guys are so completely and thoroughly unsuited to do anything else. They didn't plan to do anything else. Their plan was going to be white supremacy's secret weapon, white supremacy's stealth operatives, and that was the plan. And all this time, most of you thought that Chumps like John Lewis and Kamala Harris and the congressional black talkers were your representatives. You didn't even notice that these guys, these windbags, give their empty hot air speeches standing under the very symbols of fascism, and that none of them educated you about that. It's not because they didn't know. It's because when you feel like you're on the team, well, now you gotta stand up for the team. Yeah, but your team isn't Team Black Empowerment. It's Team White Supremacy. Well, you dance with who brought you, right? These sorry Negroes you see on white media, they're merely another form of control. I've been telling you that for years. They are another mechanism that white supremacy uses to keep us in check. And the sad truth is that they've been largely successful. You have not really questioned them, not like you should. Every once in a while, you always get some brain-dead moron who'll come bombing into the comments section going, but Maxine Waters did this, Maxine Waters said that, and Maxine Waters was this, and Kamala Harris was that, and give them time, and oh, shut up. Barack Obama and that shrew he married, they were the ultimate examples of this strategy. The don't do anything about white supremacy apologist. That's what Barack Obama was and has always been. Barack Obama sat there, and not only did he not defend the black community, heck, Barack Obama and his wife didn't even defend themselves. And they understood that that was exactly what white supremacy wanted to see. That's what the white majority wanted to see, so they tried to cover up this cowardice with blatantly insincere rhetoric about when they go low, we go high. See, they love pious Negroes like that because pious Negroes say we'll always turn the other cheek, which white supremacy clearly understands as we are never going to threaten you, we will never fight back, we will never so much as speak against you, we'll just take your abuse. When they go low, we go high. More like when white people attack us, we hide for cover. That's what she's really saying. Because Barack Obama had no problem calling Kanye West a jackass on TV. But when a white Republican called him a liar at his own State of the Union address on live international television, Barack Obama didn't have anything to say about him. See, Joe Wilson goes, "You lie!" And Barack Obama didn't call him a jackass. Kanye West gave his lopsided, some of his psychobabble about white supremacy. Barack Obama was, oh, he's a jackass. Why? Because Kanye West showed up Taylor Swift at a freaking award concert, at an award ceremony? Really? Meanwhile, you got a racist meth head who is screaming all sorts of accusations at the president live on television, and well, the president doesn't have anything to say about that. The police are killing people, and Barack Obama decides that, well, what we need is to pass laws making it where you better not question the police. In fact, we need to protect the police more, even though it's ridiculous. The police have every type of outrageous protection under law you can imagine. And the white ones, at least, are completely and thoroughly exempt from any and all punishment. What was his Blue Lives Matters stunt supposed to do? It was supposed to show, hey, I'm on the bad guy's side. That's what that was meant to do. It was a political statement is what it was. Okay, fine. But the sad part is Barack Obama's not alone when it comes to his refusal to take on white supremacy or whatever delusions he may have about it. Have you ever seen these black politicians calling white detractors out of their names? Have you seen them embracing men like Reverend Wright? Have you seen any black politician, especially at the federal level, embracing a Reverend Wright? You haven't seen them doing it. See, if you're on the white right, you can embrace Jerry Falwell. You can embrace Pat Robertson and every other sawed-off half-wit who runs around half-cocked shooting up from the lip. But if you have a black man who tells the truth about the United States, well, you're not allowed to say that this man is right on. You're not allowed to say that. You better not. The DNC leadership don't want to hear that any more than the Republicans do. And you know that's the truth. People like Keith Ellison, they thought that tiptoeing around Louis Farrakhan would protect them. It would insulate them. They would show that they're the good black Muslim. And the Supreme Court just slammed the door on Muslim immigrants. They're handed, talk about the hits just keep on coming. The Supreme Court's been on a roll, ain't they? Holding up the travel ban, deciding that Donald Trump can basically do with the budget whatever the hell he wants. And now that Supreme Court justices are peeling off. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that fossil, if she doesn't drop dead in office, she'll have to throw in the towel too. And when she does, that's going to be it. It's going to be a supermajority on the Supreme Court. It's going to be decades before that changes, simply because of how lopsided it is. We know that basically in this duopoly, the Republicans and Democrats basically trade places every cycle or so. So what that basically means is, if it goes back to tit for tat, it won't matter. The Republicans are going to have a majority on the Supreme Court for a very long time, because there simply won't be enough. There won't be a long enough Democratic reign for them to take advantage. This was a perfect storm that formed for President Tangerine, and he's going to take full advantage of it. But black politicians who are thinking to themselves that if they just play nice with white supremacy, the white supremacy will play nice with them, they're getting a hell of a wake-up call. Well, that's okay. They'll hit the snooze button soon enough. That's part of the reason why they're there, too. You don't hear Keith Ellison going all out for Muslims, do you? He's not. He's not going to. Now, of course, on the surface, what he'll say is that he's concerned that certain Jewish interested parties might look and say, well, you know, you're kind of mobbed up with Farrakhan, buddy. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is, for those of you who are Keith Ellison devotees, I hate to throw the cold water on you, but you know it's the truth. Keith Ellison is part of the white supremacist machine. He's not going all out for Muslims. He'll say a couple of things if you question him. If you bring up the subject, you have to bring it up, not him. He ain't raising the subject. But if you bring up the subject, he'll go ahead and say something like that about that. But I think that Keith Ellison has probably been more vocal about illegal immigrants than he has about Muslims being effectively banned from the country. Muslims are no longer allowed to enter the country, and apparently Keith Ellison ain't got much to say. That's because he wants to be president. And he understands that it's okay for you to say that neo-Nazis are very fine people. But you better not protest Muslims, read specifically black folks, because most of the people who Trump's ban concerns, a majority of them in numerical terms, come from African countries. This is just black by another name. You better not question that. And the Democrats are not questioning it either. How many of them have you heard making a big deal of it? The Democrats exist for the same reason as the Republicans, and that's in order to support and promote white supremacy, to give the masses the illusion of having a false choice. And this is done so that they will never, ever put someone on the ballot who threatens any of that, not even Bernie Sanders. When it came to the issue of black folks, Bernie Sanders showed you exactly where he stood. When it came to the issue of reparations, you didn't hear Bernie Sanders saying, well, if we did it for the Indians and did it for the Japanese, how the world do we not do it for black folks? You see, I was the one who gave you the verbiage, who gave you the argument for why reparations will always be necessary for black people, and will always be valid. And I even told you why, if some immigrant calls himself saying, I did nothing to black people, why should I have to pay for something these white people did? I gave you the argument for that. It's for the same reason that I, as a black man, cannot think that I'm going to go to Germany and that I don't have to pay for Germany's historical crimes, either against other Europeans, definitely not against Africans, they make no restitution to Africans, or against the Jews. If I go to Germany and my tax dollars are used in order to pay reparations to the Jews, I wouldn't be allowed to say, well, I'm a black man. I wasn't even born when that happened. If you want to live in Germany, then you have to be responsible for Germany's historical debts. And if you want to live in the United States, you are volunteering to take on America's historical debts. You didn't hear the immigrants complaining when the government made reparations to the Japanese, or when the government made reparations to Native Americans. People only complain whenever you talk about black people, and that's because they understand that there is a group think, a common code of anti-black racism that's supposed to be the glue that holds this house of thieves and slave owners and rapists and liars together. They understand what the ideological glue is supposed to be. You see, if somebody wants to live in a nice home, if they see this house and, oh, I love this 2-story house with a 3-car garage, and it's got the den and the study, and it's got 2 kitchens, 4 baths, and all that. Well, if you like all of that, well, you're also going to have to be responsible for whatever liens may be extant on that house as well. See, when you call yourself deciding you want to take advantage of the luxuries of a particular home. If that home's got any debts, you got to take on the debts too. But I didn't rack up the debts. Well, if you want this particular place, if you want into this place, you're going to have to take responsibility for it. And if you don't like that, then you need to find yourself some accommodations where you don't have to pay those debts. Because if you come to the United States, I don't give a damn if you're an Irish immigrant who showed up 150 years ago, or if you're a Hispanic who just showed up yesterday, or if you're some white person who brought the first slaves in from Africa. If you're in the United States, you owe for America's debts. And if you don't like paying the price for America's debts, if you decide, well, I didn't have nothing to do with slavery, yeah, but you benefit from it. Everyone who lives in the United States, except for black people, benefits from slavery. They benefit from the unearned, uncompensated labor of black people. But you will not hear Bernie Sanders say that. And you won't hear any of the congressional black talkers say that. Oh, as far as they're concerned, when you talk to them, they'll go behind closed doors and say, well, the reason we can't call the immigrants out is we're doing coalition building. Coalition building is supposed to go both ways, stupid. And you don't see these immigrants trying to build any kind of coalition with us. The Democrats will never put a change candidate on the ballot because change is the very thing that they were established to prevent. Dr. Claude Anderson says that our vote is nullified. Well, that's only true at the national level. At the local level, and in many cases even statewide level, the black vote is anything but nullified. It is certainly potent. The problem is it isn't aggregated or focused. That's the problem. That black power is not being utilized because we either misuse it to prop up the left-wing white supremacists, or they're black flunkies, or we don't use it at all. And with this whole illegal immigrant dust-up, we've had the black chumps who licked white supremacy's boots falling over themselves to cry for illegal aliens to get in front of the cameras. That's their job, to get in front of the cameras and show more concern for people who aren't suffering than they do for black people. They are reinforcing and promoting that racist narrative. That, well, we'll say a couple of things about black people, but only if you get in our faces. Well, hey, how about these illegal aliens who aren't even citizens? Why? Oh, give me my freaking boots. I got to get in front of the cameras right now. They'll call a press conference to advocate for illegal aliens. But you have to get these scumbags in a headlock and put a gun to their empty heads before they say anything regarding black people. And even when they do talk about black people, it's always the same old mamby-pamby, mush-mouth, spineless rhetoric that means nothing because it's not supposed to, and they never talk about punishing anyone, because for them to talk about punishing anyone, well, you would be talking about punishing white people by and large, and well, we can't do that now, can we? Oh, we have to question policies. Well, who the hell puts the policies in place? Who is responsible for carrying out these policies? Are we going to point the dirty end of the stick at them? Nope, not even once. That's the congressional black talker's job, to get in front of the cameras and to mislead people. And this kind of political theater sends the message loud and clear: black people aren't being oppressed or abused because even their own leaders are more outraged about what happens to illegal aliens than they are over what happens to their own black voters. That's what the white media does when they repeat this over and over again. They make sure it leads the news. They make sure that it's at the top of their websites. They make sure that anytime that if they're talking to black people and it's not an antagonistic, hostile interrogation, then they make sure it's always about someone to the benefit of someone other than black people. And these black politicians know that too. The only way that the white media is not going to call them in and turn it into some half-assed ambush or some half-assed interrogation is going to be as long as you're pleasing or praising other people other than black people. As long as you're advocating for someone other than black people, oh, well, it's going to be a softball interview. It's going to be a big sloppy kiss. If you want the white media to stroke your ego and tell people this person could be a presidential contender, you know, in some Democratic circles, they're saying that Senator or Congressman so-and-so could be a Democratic contender, perhaps. For black politicians, that's a pat on the head. You can see their tongues panting and their tails wagging. Oh, they said that I could be presidential material. Stupid. They're just sitting here burnishing your freaking ego, and it's the golden blackjack that never misses. See, the white media has no problem whatsoever putting Senator Empty Pantsuit in front of a camera and letting her prattle on. They have no problem putting Congressman Mushmouth in front of a camera and letting him advocate for illegal aliens or gays or anyone but black people. They have no problem putting Reverend Bacon Bits in front of a freaking camera and letting him say that illegal aliens are every bit as much God's children as everyone else, and why we shouldn't be doing anything about enforcing America's immigration laws. Well, what about enforcing the laws that you're not allowed to kill people, especially if you got a badge? Well, our politicians, they're letting us down. Yeah, that's what the white media does. They understand exactly what the purpose of that is. This is social programming that you see. Whether it is the relentless proliferation of images of George Washington as a Roman, or George Washington as a god, or George Washington in the U.S.-sponsored knockoff of the Sistine Chapel, that's social programming. That's societal indoctrination. When John Lewis stages a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives because a gay nightclub got shot up, but he does nothing after a white supremacist shoots up a church, he's following orders. People notice that. They notice that, oh, you shoot up a gay nightclub, John Lewis is going to be breaking out his civil rights credentials, ragged as they may be. But if you shoot up a black church, well, we need to pray. He ain't going to the floor of the House of Representatives and saying, I'm not going to leave until the Congress passes laws going after these white supremacist groups. Where is the Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act of 2018? See, there was the Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. But where's the Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act today? Where is the Anti-Alt-Right Act today? Where is the Anti-Police Violence Act at today? Where are the congressional black talkers to either decide that they're going to filibuster, even though that has largely been invalidated as a tactic? Or where are they at to say we're going to just bring the business of the House to a stop until these things get put on the agenda? Where is that at? Where are they at for that? These so-called black leaders sold out the moment they decided they wanted to get their paycheck from white supremacy, because that's exactly what they do. These congressmen and senators and such, they are eating off of white supremacy. White supremacy pays their bills. And as Upton Sinclair once said, it is impossible to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. But white supremacy is reaching its end game now. Where they've been meaning to go from the very beginning, as far as they're concerned, it's time to go ahead and wrap this up. And they're through humoring these puppets. White supremacy is beginning to edge them out, and they're desperately trying to reinvent themselves. We see this across the board. White supremacy's bootlicks, whether they be fools and lackeys for the administrative arm of white supremacy, that is the government, or the enforcement arm of white supremacy, that is the police and the military, or the propaganda arm of white supremacy, that is the white media. When you see these black folks who thought that they were going to make a career out of working for white supremacy, that white supremacy was going to provide them with a pension, now they're finding themselves getting edged out, and whether it's these desperate, pathetic, so-called anchor people. An anchor is supposed to be something that holds a particular ship to a position. It's supposed to be something that roots you. Yeah, but these guys are getting uprooted. The anchor is being thrown overboard and left behind. In the case of the black ones. So they're wondering what the hell their next act is going to be. Hey, has anyone heard from Roly Poly yet? Has he surfaced anywhere? You got a radio show yet? Has he got another show? Hey, has CNN picked him back up yet? Has MSNBC given him a show? I mean, he's been auditioning and campaigning for that for the longest time. Nah, didn't think there were going to be any takers. Hey, how about Tamron Hall, huh? She's got to be on the comeback sooner or later, right? Nah, I guess not. And neither do the rest of them. Hey, has Jemele Hill gotten her dream gig yet? Or is she still out there bashing black men online in the desperate hope that this is going to land her some sort of lucrative white supremacist writing assignment? Pretty much the only one who seemed to have something resembling a second act was Melissa Lacefront Harris von Perry Stubenberg around the world in 80 days. Yeah, she's about the only one who actually got something, but you ain't heard from her, have you? Dorothy Taylor, ain't heard from her. Jemele Hill, she's just MIA. Yeah, you see, when you get out there and carry water for white supremacy, you gotta understand, they're not looking to help you make that into a career. It's a one and done. But of course, what's true for the individual is also true for the group. When we look at organizations like the NAACP, we see them as what they are. The NAACP is a social whorehouse. And these days, they see young people aren't having anything to do with them. Young black people are turning their back on the NAACP because the NAACP has always had its back turned to the black community. So this group of civil rights retreads, they're pathetically trying to reinvent themselves as some sort of ACLU derivative. Basically, we're like the ACLU, only staffed by black people and with no money and no social significance and no societal impact. They get nothing done. They don't do anything. But as far as they're concerned, they want to be the black version of the ACLU. And we see black publications in particular, both online and in print. And these guys are the biggest whorehouses of them all, trying as hard as they can to get as far away from blackness as possible. They want to amalgamate themselves. They want to de-racialize themselves. They want to make sure that nobody looks at them as being black. Oh, well, sure, there are black people here, but you know, we're not really about black. We're about a lot of things, you know. Oh, we're just going to hide behind this colorblind rhetoric. What they really mean is we want everyone to look at us as being a publication that's for everybody. Well, if you're for everybody, you can't be for black people. We need advocates who are for us, not merely specifically, but exclusively. We don't need advocates who are for gays, humpbacks, one-eyed, one-horned, blind people eaters, illegal aliens, Martians, black people hair weave. They're for engineers. They're for, you know, disabled people. We don't need that. We need folks who are in the tank for us exclusively, who are giving their all for us. That's what we need. You ain't gonna find that from the old dead black media. They towed the black feminine line and they wound up going broke and having to sell to white companies or sell to two-bit shysters like Byron Allen. They want white corporate sponsorship, so they decided decades ago that taking on white supremacy was out of the question. These publications have been barely relevant for years, and in the last 15 years, they've become completely irrelevant. So now they want to advocate for gays, for illegals, white women, but not for black people. And the so-called broadcast equivalents of these black sewers are no better. I mean, when you see the same white media that used to say, well, isn't BET kind of reverse racist? I mean, what would you say if there was a white entertainment television? Now they talk about the BET Awards. They talk about the Essence Awards. Yeah, they got no problem talking about it now because as far as they're concerned, these guys have made themselves sufficiently supplicant to white supremacy. But you can see the desperation that's setting in. You can feel the panic that's beginning to take hold with these black mouthpieces. They see the tectonic plates moving and they don't like the direction that they're moving in. They look at what's happened to their mouthpieces like Roly Poly and Jamel Hill and others, and what they're thinking to themselves is, man, this is, if one part of white supremacy, if one of white supremacy's various arms is slapping around their former bootlicks, whether it's in government or the police or media, well, that means that all of us black mouthpieces for white supremacy happen to be at risk. They understand exactly what's happening. The same people who cut Roly Poly off, it wasn't because of the fact that Roly Poly said something they didn't like. It was because of the fact that they were tired of looking at him. They didn't need him anymore. And when you see black folks getting purged wholesale from entire networks, what that shows is they're being blatant about it. These networks are no longer black friendly in any shape, form, or fashion. They're not even going to pretend to be. And these black publications are going, well, hell, if that's what white employers do to their black employees at these white media outlets, well, aren't we, as the old black media, isn't Essence and BET and Jet and Black Enterprise and others, aren't we merely employees of our white corporate sponsors? What's true for the individual is also true for the group. If white supremacy is tired of looking at the individual black person in their newsroom or on their television screen, that means they're probably tired of looking at these black publications too. That's what's going on around the old black media. And they're panicking because they don't have a plan B. They broke faith with black people. People like you who listen to guys like me, you're the ones that they were trying to hold on to because you're the ones who actually pay for things. That's part of the reason why you never see me talking about the freaking world star hip-hop crowd or the hood clips crowd or the sitting on their mother's couch 8 hours a day smoking a joint crowd. I don't give a damn about those clowns. Those clowns are not going to take us anywhere. They're not going to do anything. Black empowerment's success or failure will hinge entirely on its ability to aggregate resources. And you don't get resources from hood rats and dusty dudes. You get resources from people like you. You guys are the life's blood of black empowerment. I crafted this message over the course of a decade to be like this because you're the kind of crowd that I want to attract. Black people who are either business owners or, at the very least, gainfully employed. Black people who know the value of a dollar. Black people who actually have money to spend, not with me, because I'm not even trying to get you to spend money with me. That's part of the reason a lot of you wonder, well, Professor Truth, you keep talking about putting money into black media, so, is this you asking us for money? Have you heard me ask you for money? In 11 years of talking like this, in 11 years, have I done it yet? What I'm telling you is you better make sure that not merely are you somebody who's working for a living, not only do you have a couple of gold bars stacked up, but you better make sure that you put some muscle behind the movement. And that muscle always comes in the form of where you put your money at. That's why white supremacy is terrified. They're looking at what you guys are doing, and what they understand is, if these guys aggregate enough black people like this, the right black people, man, white supremacy is going to find itself on its heels pretty damn fast. Ask Rupert Murdoch. Broke the bastard's back. He decided he was going to put out images of white Egyptians. We broke his back. And look, I will freely admit, I say this openly, against my own wishes. I know that some of y'all were out there saying the Black Panther was just the greatest thing ever. Your dollars make a big difference. But I want it to be understood we cannot afford to have situations where you guys are putting more money behind Disney than you do behind the new voices of black media. Now, that ain't going to fly. That ain't going to work. It does us no good if you guys are withholding your dollars from the old, decrepit, sellout black media, but you're lukewarm or tepid when it comes to supporting the new voices of black media. The enthusiasm gap is real, but thanks to you, we are going to be able to vault that. People who actually talk real are going to find that they don't need to be on any white media outlet, and they don't need to go begging any of these dying, desiccated husks that used to be black media in name only to give them anything. There are more than enough of you. If we aggregate these numbers, there's more than enough of you guys to be able to support whatever type of aggressive black empowerment, pro-black media that we want to generate. There's more than enough of us to get that done. Some of you ask me all the time, well, why don't you debate so-and-so, like Mushmouth, you know who I'm talking about. Or why don't you debate somebody like a Matthew Heimbach? Why don't you debate a Richard Spencer? You need to debate so-and-so. You want to know why I don't debate these bastards? It's because I don't have to. I don't need to. People like Mushmouth, the guy who sounds like it, that clown, he's looking for a white audience. When black people talk like that, when black people talk like Barack Obama or talk like David Clark, two sides of the same coin, Barack Obama and David Clark are just two sides of the same coin. These guys are looking for a white audience. When black people are trying to figure out how to get white people to look at them. And that's what they have to do, because they're depending on white people to pay their bills. I have never come to you and said pay my bills at all, but here's the thing. If I ever decided that I was going to try to build some sort of permanent full-time media apparatus, I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't be looking at any white people to support me in any shape, form, or fashion. Because I've already got the best squad that there is. I'm not looking for white support. I'm not out here campaigning for white sponsorship. That's the reason why you don't see me sitting here trying to debate with these guys, because I don't have to. They're the ones who do this as a means of trying to show out for what they hope are going to be white benefactors. I don't have to lower myself to that. The old black media, they have to lower themselves to that because black people like you are gravitating away from these scumbags. And you are gravitating towards places like this. You're the ones who used to keep these bastards alive, and now you turn your backs on them. Yeah, Ebony and Jet and Black Enterprise, you guys are on life support and we're pulling the plug. These bootlicks were going hard in the paint for everybody except black people, precisely because they know that that's what the white powers that be want to see from them. At this late date, even though it's obvious that white supremacy has had more than enough of them, they are still auditioning for what they hope are going to be more white dollars from this or that moneyed white interest group. And as we see, the competition is fierce, and at this point it's becoming cannibalistic. All these fakers, frauds, and phonies tripping over one another to show who could be the most passionate in their defense of people who deliberately broke into the country, or people who have never held black folks' interests at heart. And they also make a show of not pointing out that the entire reason that these illegal aliens are being treated in the way that they are is because the Hispanics said nothing for over 140 years as black people have been treated this way. The Hispanics didn't have a problem with black folks being treated this way. It never occurred to them that the exact same legal principles that are supposed to be able to anchor black people to our rights are the same ones the Hispanics are depending on for theirs. If you make America into a safe space for the mistreatment of any people as a group, then you're also opening the door for someone to do it to you should you be in their crosshairs. This isn't new. This isn't unusual. In fact, this is standard operating procedure in the U.S. The only thing that's different now is that it's not happening to black children. Just a bit of an aside about that whole illegal alien thing. Now, the words you just heard me say, that's what Barbara Lee, Kamala Harris, Michael Eric Dyson, and the rest of the clown car of black misleaders should be saying, but never will. Michael Eric Dyson calls himself trying to defend Bill Maher. Bill Maher's been a racist for the longest time. I mean, you know things are messed up when Ice Cube has to be the one to call Bill Maher on the carpet because your supposedly black advocate, the man who fancies himself as being oh so learned as a mouthpiece for black people, Michael Eric dumbass, won't say anything. Yeah, that's because he wants to be getting his little appearance fees for going on these shows. He wants to get his little $2,000 or $3,000 from these little white audiences, these little white media outlets. That's what he's there for. You cannot and should not be allowed to separate the treatment of black people from the discussion about incarceration in the U.S., no matter who it happens to. I don't give a damn if somebody's locking up gay people for sodomizing each other. You should immediately point out black people. Anytime that somebody brings up some other group, especially if the issue is incarceration, you should always be bringing up black folks. You should never miss an opportunity to mention black people. That New York congressman, I think he's from New York, Luis Gutierrez, whatever the hell his name is, man, you could be talking about freaking SpongeBob SquarePants. He'll still bring up Latinos no matter what. He never misses a chance to mention Hispanics, no matter how inappropriate the subject matter. There is no subject too far-fetched or too out in the weeds or something that's just so far afield that he can't bring Hispanics into the conversation. He does it every chance he gets. And to ignore how this is the way that black people are treated in the United States is to pretend that this policy and the racial aggression that underlies it just sprouted out of the ground, that President Tangerine just got up one morning and said, man, I just can't imagine where all of these detention centers came from. Donald Trump is simply capitalizing on what America has always done. In fact, from Rikers Island to Pelican Bay, we've seen black people systematically and as a matter of standard operating procedure denied the right to know the charges against them, denied the right to counsel, denied the right to a speedy trial, and in a hell of a lot of cases, denied the right to a trial period. Black politicians ought to be using every conversation that they're a part of, any issue they're able to speak on, anytime they're in front of the camera, as an opportunity to point out that when it comes to injustice in the U.S., nobody has it worse than black people, and that unless you fix the systematic mistreatment of black people, then it is impossible to stop it from happening to anyone else. That should be the whole of any conversation regarding these illegal aliens and their kids being separated. If you're going to talk about any sort of due process mistreatment, you cannot have a legitimate conversation without bringing black people into consideration. In fact, black people should be the only thing you talk about, because we are the reason why this stuff happens. You got a country that is trying to square a particular circle, and the idea is we're going to have it both ways. We're going to claim that we're not a white supremacist hellhole, and at the same time, we're going to be proving it every day through our treatment of black people. But you know what? These black mouthpieces, they divorced themselves from any association with black people a long time ago. They see themselves as no different than a white liberal. When you hear people like Eric Dyson and Kamala Harris speaking about black folks with so little concern, have you ever noticed that they sound like they're talking about a group of people who they're not a part of? Like they're talking about some other group of people. That's because in their minds, that's exactly what they're doing. They're advocating for this other group over here. Oh, these black folks? Well, you know, I got a couple of minor things to say regarding black people. Nothing too passionate, mind you, because black people don't really matter. Who matters are the gays and the illegals and the feminists and the humpbacks and the one-eyed, one-horned, blind, purple people eaters. That's who really matters. But black folks, you know, they be all right. The white power brokers and influence peddlers who these black mouthpieces depend upon for every crumb of their daily bread, they want to see the relentless legitimization of the idea that everyone matters except black folks. No one is asking how many of those illegal children committed some sort of crime. Oh, you're going to talk about the kids who are being separated from their parents? Oh, they're putting them in cages? Well, did they commit some sort of crime? What was their behavior in school? See, they don't do that with these illegal aliens kids, but they did do that to Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin. Black leaders are supposed to be nonstop advocates for us. I don't care if the discussion is about the price of rice in China. A black spokesperson is supposed to always bring us into the conversation. That's what they're there for. Who needs a mouthpiece who speaks for everyone except you? Or a mouthpiece who only mentions you when it comes time for re-election and never at any other moment? You know what? We are going to have to institute a system of punishments for that kind of behavior. It is not enough to merely be able to incentivize proper behavior. We must also have several means of punishing those who work against our interests. Not just one or two means, but we got to have an entire freaking war chest full of tools at our disposal that we can use to punish those who act against us. So long as we remain unable or unwilling to penalize these black mouthpieces for white supremacy, there's always going to be some John Lewis running around. Undermining us has to carry a heavy price, and we must be the ones charging that price. These clowns aggressively push the gay lifestyle, which we all recognize to be antithetical to the growth of the black population. The lifestyle is not something that we as black people should have any interest in. And certainly not any of these misleaders. See, other groups, whenever their leaders decide that they're going to get off topic or they're going to get off code, they pull their coat. They pull their coat hard. The white media also joins in as well. They make sure to question them. Well, you know, you said such and such about how black people shouldn't be shot in the street. Well, you know, we need to look at the stats, you know. Stats actually meaning talking points. As black folks, we gotta stop letting the white media lead us around by the nose. Stand in our own interest. I don't care what's trending on Twitter. I don't care what this or that website makes into their front page posting. I understand that these white websites and white TV stations and other white media outlets are all working in concert with one another. These guys are working as a team. Their staff members went to the same schools. They're often married to one another. In fact, they're usually habitually married to one another. They do business with each other. They've got all sorts of collusive arrangements with one another. They got their little trade organizations and such. They go to the same churches. I mean, come on, these guys are working hand in hand. There is no such thing as separate white media outlets. These guys are all part of the same white media machine. When you see the white media making a big deal out of some know-nothing topic, you need to realize that they're doing it as a distraction. When has white media ever empowered you as a black person? Can you even name one time when they have? Where has white media ever informed you? Can you think of one time where the white media has actually told you something that you didn't already know? Or that the white media made it a point to give you information necessary for you to hold on to and expand your own power? As a black person, I ain't talking about some talking head on PBS who's giving you advice, financial advice. They're doing that for a white audience, not for you. When it comes to the white media, we spend most of our time complaining about them. That's because we know that they don't work in our interests. We know full well the white media isn't merely underserving black people. They are doing us a disservice. Emphasis on the dis part. But we have to take responsibility for the fact that we don't truly value black-oriented media, at least not the way that we should. And by black-oriented media, I mean real black media, not Byron Allen or TV None. I mean black media that says what you're thinking. Black media that takes on the important issues. Black media that exposes the forces and people working against us. Black media that forwards and defends what's in our interests and accurately tells us what is going to happen tomorrow. Information, discernment, foresight. Those are supposed to be the operational pillars of real black media. You see, we're not going to be sitting here running for cover when the heat gets hot. We have our principles, we have our value system, and we're going to stand on it. You see, we ain't going to be like Roly-Poly Martin, who, whenever he sees that the bosses, Kathy Hughes or whomever at TV None, is looking at him and going, you know what, it's about time for you to unass that anchor chair. And all of a sudden he wants to start talking black as his Hail Mary. That's supposed to be his last ditch. We don't need black mouthpieces like that, who only start saying the right thing as an afterthought occasionally whenever they feel that, well, this is all I got left. I'll do the right thing, but only after I've run out of all other options, when it's the only option left. Same thing with Don Lemonade over at CNN. He'll say these days, I guess he's seeing the writing on the wall. I guess he's understanding, you know what, it wouldn't be very hard for them to find some other gay person, white in this case, like Anderson Cooper. I think old Don is starting to dawn on him that it wouldn't take much for Anderson Cooper to find one of his friends to put in Don Lemon's seat. He could disappear very easily. I think it's just starting to dawn on him. But you know what? We are not going to be able to fight white media until we finally mature to the point that we are enthusiastic about following our interests and not their distractions. That's why I keep mentioning the enthusiasm gap over and over and over again. Black empowerment versus white supremacy is a clash of civilizations, or rather, it's black civilization versus white barbarism. But more than that, it's a clash of two diametrically opposed value systems. Ask the white historian or the white anthropologist what is the single most important development in the history of man, and the white historian or expert will say, when man discovered fire. Well, of course they're going to say that. Fire is what made it possible for the European to create weapons. Beyond that, fire itself can be used as a tool of torture and destruction. It can be used as a tool of fear. To put fire at the apex of human experience, that makes sense for them because everything revolves around the principle of war for them. Now, on the other hand, ask the African what he sees as the most significant development in history, and a lot of them are likely to say music. Because this was something that goes beyond words. Music goes beyond what you can taste or touch. And yet when the African discovered the use of harmonious vibrations, he found something truly extraordinary. Something that has the ability to create and to not destroy. Something that can change people's moods, make them relax, or make them feel compelled to get up and move. This is not merely a distinction of historical viewpoints. It's a distinction of fundamental values. The African brought music to the Caucasian too, but the only music that they seemed interested in were songs of war and battle. And we see this come full circle with the deification of genocidal George Washington, taking a monster, taking a man whose only accomplishment, the only thing you can name about George Washington is the fact that he fought wars. That's all you can name about him. Please name one bit of legislation that George Washington got passed when he was president. Name one piece of significant legislation that passed over his desk. Name one piece of significant legislation that he put on the books. Name anything. Hell, name anything that he proposed. You can't, because he never did. The boy never was very bright. He was a man of few words and even fewer ideas. And yet you find that you had all of these white supremacists who decided that they were going to make statues of him all over the world, that they were going to show him as being some sort of natural historical successor to the Romans and the Greeks, that they were going to show him as being a god. They're letting you know what they think, or rather they're letting you know what they want you to think. Well, if you don't want to fall prey to all of this white supremacist propaganda, then you better start making it a point to embrace channels like this, to embrace outlets like this, to embrace real black media. You better start making it a point to get enthused about it, excited about it. You better make it a point to ask yourself every day, what can I do to get involved? What can I do to be part of it? What can I do to help promote and push this? Because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. The only voices out there operating in your interest are the new voices of black media. Nobody else is doing it. If we have you behind us, then what's going to happen is the fight is going to be long, but it will ultimately prove victorious. We will expose these historical frauds. We will point them out. People are going to be enlightened, but more importantly than that, they're going to be provoked. And that's what we want to do. We want to provoke people. Because it's way past time that people got sick and tired of seeing these obscenities, whether it's George Washington the God, or whether it's the white media prioritizing everyone but black people. It's way past time that we stopped just sitting on our hands for this. It is way past time that we stopped giving white supremacy a free ride. If they think to themselves that they're going to explain away the crimes of George Washington, or that they're going to explain away the crimes being enacted against black people today, we are supposed to be the ones who say, no chance, here it is. This is our mission. This is our hallowed struggle. We are not going to be having any black folks, at least no one like myself, who's going to be running around in Roman attire or anything like that, because I'm not here to try to get you to deify me. I'm not here to try to get you to put me on a pedestal or to elevate me to divine status. You couldn't make a statue of me even if you wanted to. How could you? You've never seen me. You see, that's what happens when somebody is operating in your interest and not their own. That's what happens when somebody is interested in the interests of the group and not self-serving. You've never seen Professor Black Truth saying, everyone get behind me! Me first! No, it's black first. I don't want you to have any sort of freaking paintings of me on someone's ceiling. I'd slap you in the face if you tried. That's, first of all, it's a waste of time. That's time that you could be spending fighting white supremacy. Yes, there is a place for imagery. Yes, there is a place for symbols. Yes, there is a place for iconography. But Professor Truth ain't it. We got plenty of heroes who deserve to have their image forever immortalized in stone or steel. But you're not going to see me saying it needs to be me. White supremacy is about trying to control your mind. I am about getting you to control your mind. I want you to wake up. I want you to become active. I want you to see the lies and the fascism all around you. Because the day when we actually come into our own is going to be the day when you have black people who have the power to unilaterally tear down all the satanic images of George Washington, to erase him from any place where his image may be, to finally bleach the ceiling of the Capitol building. And it doesn't matter how much whining, wailing, and caterwauling comes from this or that particular group of people. When we have the ability and the willingness to act in our own interest and to tear down anything that honors our oppressors, when we get to the point where we are proud to do it, when we take glee in hearing, oh, you can't do that, you're erasing our history, when we take glee and go, damn right we are, when we get to that point, when we've matured and grown to that point, when we make it a point that those who have committed historical sins against us are going to pay, and we will deny them the favorable judgment of history by erasing them from history, when we finally have matured to that point, then and only then can we say that black empowerment at long last has finally arrived.